Boom, 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 apple pie and mama's cooking through the American. Boom, 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 rich or black, white, how you look, you can make it if American. Just do your stuff and do it well. Lots before us did it and we think they're swell. It's the spirit of America, the people that rule the American. They're through the American.
This is the model of one of our modern jet passenger planes. A real beauty, isn't she? Oh, we've certainly come a long way since that morning at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, when Orville Wright made the very first powered airplane flight in history. Now, that first flight lasted all of 12 seconds and covered 120 feet. That's not quite half the length of a football field. Why, there are jets today that can cover some 6,000 miles in one flight at twice the speed of sound. Others capable of carrying hundreds of passengers in spacious, luxurious cabins. We live in a dynamic age in which the dreams of yesterday's aviation pioneers are everyday happenings. Why, we've put men on the moon. We have flying laboratories orbiting the Earth. And we've sent satellites deep into space to observe other planets. I want you to take a look at this model I'm building. It might look a little old-fashioned to you, but there was a time when this little baby was just about the sleekest aircraft flying the skies. It was built by the Lockheed Aircraft Company back in 1936, and it was called an Electra. Our story today is about an extraordinary young woman who flew many different kinds of planes, among them the Electra. She was a courageous pioneer who, through a series of incredible flights, helped write the history of aviation. She was, furthermore, a lady who strongly maintained that women should be just as adventuresome as men, and certainly demonstrated it throughout her lifetime. So come fly with me back to the year 1898, when the horse was king of the road, when people traveled from coast to coast by coal-powered train, and when the only flying machines with wings were birds. It was on July 24th of that year that Amelia Mary Earhart was born in the home of her grandparents in Atchison, Kansas. Her mother's name was Amy, and her father, Edwin Stanton Earhart, was a railroad attorney who spent much of his time traveling. So you see, Amelia and her younger sister Muriel spent most of their childhood with their grandparents. Now, the two girls, regular tomboys, were always getting involved in one hair-raising scheme or another. Of course, Amelia, being the oldest, was the ringleader. One of her projects, for example, was a roller coaster made from scraps of lumber, fence railings, and much hammering and imagination. The coaster itself was a large plank which rode on some old skate wheels. Naturally, there were lots of blood-curdling crashes and bruises, but Amelia loved every daring second of it. Amelia's mother quickly learned that the frills and the ruffles and the long skirts worn by most girls were too fragile for her active daughters. So after school and on Saturdays, they wore flannel gym suits with pleated bloomers, which gave them freedom to climb hills and trees, to explore the woods, to go fishing, and to play such games as baseball and football. But then life was not all rough outdoor play for Amelia.
Mother used to read to us every night before we went to bed. It was beautiful, listening and pretending. I loved poetry also. Used to write my own verses. There were other things at home, too, like the night we were allowed to sit up long past our bedtime so that we could see an eclipse of the moon, or the time in 1910 when we stayed up half the night in order to watch Halley's Comet.
Amelia's parents encouraged her to explore and experience the things around her, whether it was riding a horse Western style, milking a cow, bringing home a frog, or belly-whopping down the side of a hill. In 1918, while attending school in Pennsylvania, Amelia went to spend the Christmas holidays with her sister Muriel, who was a student at a college in Toronto, Canada. While there, she was shocked by the sight of the many wounded and badly crippled soldiers returning from Europe, where the First World War had just ended. Matter of fact, she was so profoundly touched that she immediately quit school and remained in Canada to do what she could to help those soldiers. She became a nurse's aide and was assigned to Spadina Military Hospital, where she made beds, carried food trays, rubbed backs, emptied bedpans, and tried to be as cheerful as possible under the circumstances. She worked from 7 in the morning until 7 at night, with 2 hours off in the afternoon. Now, it was during one of those 2-hour breaks one day that Amelia drove out to a small airfield to watch a stunt flyer put a tiny plane through some breathtaking loops and turns.
It was the first time I felt the excitement of aviation. Afterward, I used to go to Armour Heights, a flying field on the outskirts of Toronto. I watched training flights, talked to all the young flyers, and hung around watching the mechanics working on the planes.
One hot summer day a few years later, Amelia and her father went to watch an air circus at a field near Long Beach, California. Oh, the old excitement flared up as Amelia stood fascinated, gaping at the planes swooping and looping and twisting and turning. Well, that was it. Right then and there, she decided that she was going to fly. Only problem was the flying lessons cost $500, and her father didn't happen to have an extra $500 around for anything as crazy as flying. Well, that didn't bother Amelia. She went right out and found a job working as a filing clerk in the mail department of a telephone company. And as soon as she'd save enough money for a lesson, out she'd zip to the airfield. And even before she completed her lessons, she decided that she was going to buy her own plane.
It was a small yellow sport plane that was so light I could pick it up by the tail and turn it around. Called it Little Sandpiper. I made a small down payment, but then, to help pay off the remaining $2,000, took on an extra job as a truck driver for a sand and gravel company.
She made her first solo flight in the Little Sandpiper. And though she was now a full-fledged pilot, her flying meant nothing more to her than, an expensive hobby. Still searching for a career, she returned to the East where she became a social worker. By 1928, she was a full-time staff member and resident of Dennison House, a neighborhood welfare agency in Boston, where she worked with preschoolers and served as counselor for girls aged 5 to 14. But flying was in her blood, and she soon found her way back into aviation as a partner in a new flying field just outside Boston. She flew several times a week and worked with Ruth Nichols, a veteran flyer from New York, to organize the women pilots of the world. It was at that time that she received an unexpected call from a New York public relations man who had heard of the young social worker who flies. He offered her the chance to try out for what he called a mysterious flying venture which might be hazardous. Well, that flying venture, unknown to her at the time, was to catapult Amelia Earhart to fame and change her entire life. A New York group headed by George Palmer Putnam, a publisher, who later was to become Amelia's husband, and Mrs. Frederick Guest, a wealthy American who was financing the venture, had been searching for a qualified young woman who would be willing to fly the Atlantic, thereby becoming the very first woman ever to do so. Many women were interviewed, and Amelia emerged the winner. Now, the plane for the flight, which had already been flown to the North Pole by the famed explorer Admiral Richard E. Byrd, was called the Friendship. Its wings were painted a bright gold, and its wheels had been replaced with pontoons just in case the plane would have to crash land in the ocean.
Our crew consisted of Bill Stultz, the pilot, Slim Gordon, mechanic navigator, and of course myself. On June 3rd, 1928, we took off from Boston Harbor, Massachusetts. After stops at Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, we landed at Buryport, Wales, having been airborne for 20 hours and 40 minutes over the Atlantic.
News of the successful flight spread quickly, making Amelia an instant celebrity. Oh, people cheered her. They hounded her for autographs. She was bombarded with telegrams, letters, and invitations. Why, even President Coolidge cabled congratulations. She was a brand new American heroine. Flying would never again be just a hobby. It would be her life's work. Now, the Friendship's transatlantic flight had been a most remarkable achievement. Still, it wasn't as if she'd accomplished it on her own. And this she was determined to do, to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean. So, at 12 minutes past 7 o'clock on the evening of May 20th, 1931, Amelia Earhart, all alone in a red and gold single-engine Lockheed Vega, rolled down the runway of the Harbor Grace Airfield in Newfoundland, gently